Often, when we talk to people who support abortion, they have very concrete circumstances in mind in which they think that abortion should be allowed. And yet, what if somebody says that they just don't want to be a bad parent, or that those who would be bad parents should be allowed to have abortions? What do we do then? Well, that's the focus of today. Stay tuned. Hi, folks. Welcome back to the Pro-Life Guys podcast, a show dedicated to equipping you with the tools that you need to have compassionate and compelling conversations about abortion so that together we can change minds, save lives, and transform our culture. Welcome back to everybody who has been a past listener. Thank you for hanging with the show. And anyone who's new, welcome. I'm glad that you can be along for the ride. As I mentioned, this is all about equipping you with the tools that you need to have good conversations, whether those conversations are with your friends and family members, your coworkers, people in your church community, or otherwise in your sphere of influence, your natural sphere of influence, as it were. Or maybe you're joining an outreach team. Maybe you are directly connected with one of CCBR's offices or community groups. Maybe you are affiliated with another pro-life organization in America or somewhere around the world. I'm glad to have you along for the ride. The entire goal of this program is to be able to give you the tools that you need to change hearts and minds on abortion. Because as we often talk about, politics are downstream of culture, that we need to change hearts and minds before we're going to change legislation. And in many ways, we need to change hearts and minds to push people towards the pregnancy care centers. We have so many incredible pregnancy care centers and support centers across the country and around the world. And yet often the majority of people stream right past a pregnancy care center, not because of a lack of support or a lack of resources, but in many ways because of a lack of education and understanding that they don't understand that abortion directly and intentionally ends the life of an innocent human being, a human being who deserves human rights from the moment that their life begins until the moment their life ends. And so we need to have these good conversations about abortion. And like I mentioned off the top, a lot of the time we talk to people with very concrete arguments. We'll talk with people who say abortion should be allowed for a victim of sexual assault. This person didn't choose to become pregnant. They didn't even choose to engage in sexual activity. They were taken advantage of and violently attacked by an atrocious perpetrator. They should not be forced to continue with pregnancy. They should be allowed to have an abortion. Tackle that in recent weeks, and so check out the show notes below for how I respond to that. We also talk at times with people who say, regardless of the circumstances, bodily autonomy is supreme, that you have a complete sovereign right over your own body, and therefore, even though abortion directly and intentionally kills an innocent human, you should be allowed to have an abortion because it's your body, it's your choice. Again, we have an episode on that. Check it out in the show notes below. We try to equip you with the tools to respond to very particular arguments. Recently, we talked about what if they say that a preborn child is a parasite, that is simply sucking the time and energy and life from the mother. That mother should be allowed to defend herself. That mother should be allowed to have an abortion because the preborn child is just a parasite. Check that one out in the show notes below as well. But as I mentioned, what happens if it's more vague? What happens if it's simply that abortion should be allowed to prevent people from being bad parents? And I think that, again, let's start by talking about what is underlying this statement. And I think that often we go one of two directions with this, that there's two reasons why people are saying this, and there's also two different kind of situations that people have in mind. The first reason why people say this is often what I have found not to be the selfish one. We'll talk about the selfish one in just a moment, but often there are people who will look around either at the people around them, the people in their neighborhood, their friend group, their family group. Maybe they're even reflecting upon their own childhood experience and saying, there are way too many bad parents out there. There are children who are not receiving the resources, the material goods that they deserve. There are kids going to school hungry. There are kids going to school without proper clothing or winter gear and whatnot. And it's not because the parents are trying their best and simply not able to reach a particular standard for a variety of reasons, but rather because the parents are simply bad parents. Maybe they're thinking of, these parents spend all of their money on lottery tickets and cigarettes, and they don't care about the kid at all. All they care about is themselves. And therefore, out of compassion and empathy for born children, abortion should be allowed because those parents, those people should not be having children. The second reason is obviously the more selfish one, and they're not so much thinking about other people and other people's children, but rather they're reflecting upon their own life, and they're saying, I would be a bad parent. I don't want to make the sacrifices necessary, relevant, or appropriate to care for a child in the way that I know that I ought to. That I want to have an abortion because my conscience will nag me to be a good parent, and I don't want to be a good parent. I'm not willing to become a good parent, and you shouldn't want me to be a bad parent. Therefore, if I'm not going to be a good parent and you don't want me to be a bad parent, I shouldn't be a parent at all. I think both of these scenarios obviously indicate uh, a worldview in which they think that abortion is not ending pregnancy, but rather preventing parenthood. That they're reflecting on this and they're saying, okay, if somebody is going to be a bad parent, let's prevent them from being a parent. And you are not somehow a parent while you're pregnant. Therefore, if we catch it early enough, if we end the pregnancy early enough, then we will prevent you from being a parent in the first place. And so obviously at some point, we're going to have to clarify the fact that they are already a parent. We're going to have to clarify that from the moment of fertilization onwards, they are a parent. And so abortion is not going to prevent them from becoming a parent, but rather simply transform them from being a parent of a living child to being a parent of a dead child. And that's something that should weigh heavily on their hearts and our hearts, and something that we should work together on to prevent that circumstance from coming about. And so that's obviously the reasons why they might be reflecting upon it. And I think also they're often reflecting even on the difference that there might be people who might not be having an attitude of like, I want to be a bad parent, but there's some people who will say like, try as I might, I will end up being a bad parent. I think of this often as anxious people, not bad people. And not that I want to get into the bad people, good people kind of thing. But I think that there's a lot of people that I talk to, at least on street corners and on doorsteps, who are fearful of becoming parents because they actually appreciate the weight of parenthood. They understand the responsibility that goes along with parenthood, and that this isn't a flippant selfishness of, you know what, I don't want to stop eating sushi. I don't want to stop drinking alcohol. I don't want to have to worry about daycare or changing my budget or anything like that, but rather, try as I might, I am a young person. I don't have an established career. I have other commitments. I have this, I have that. Like, I know that even though I would try my best to be a good parent, I would fail in doing so. And I am petrified of being a bad parent. And I think that there is some surface level honor and humility that goes along with that I know that I'm a bad parent. I'm sure that any other parent out there knows that at times they have been a bad parent as well, that we are not perfect people. We are far from it. We are sinners and we make bad decisions. And tragically, so often those bad decisions and those shortcomings and those failures impact those around us. And it's heartbreaking when those impact the adults around us, the grown people around us. But it's even more heartbreaking when those decisions, when those failures and shortcomings impact children around us, particularly our own children. And I have had many sleepless nights, to put it on the table. I've had many sleepless nights acknowledging the fact that I am not the parent that I want to be. And what have I gotten myself into? And really grappling with the fact of like, how dare I bring these children into the world when I know that I'm not going to be the parent that they deserve, that I'm not going to be the parent that they want or that they need, that I am going to be a bad parent? I think that's something that people who are already parents grapple with, and it's certainly something that those who are not currently parents grapple with, and might cause them to not want to become a parent. Again, it speaks to um, the question of whether abortion prevents you from being a parent or whether abortion simply changes what kind of parent you are. But there's that kind of anxious parent, and then there's also the person who looks towards, okay, well, what if somebody is a drug addict? What if somebody objectively would be harming their child? Maybe they are abusive, maybe they are addicted, maybe they are struggling with all sorts of other personal challenges, and they simply objectively will be a bad parent here and now. That I'm not saying that they will always be a bad person. I'm not saying that they're a bad person right now. I'm just saying that being addicted to drugs, being homeless, being this, being that will prevent you from providing the essentials of life. And again, we're going to want to jump in with foster care and adoption, all that kind of stuff. We're not going to do that yet. As we've talked about, we don't want to refute, we don't want to resolve yet. Okay, we need to build common ground, make analogies, and ask questions to build that camaraderie, to build that rapport, to acknowledge where that person is coming from, because we need to go and get them and walk with them as companions along this journey towards the pro-life worldview. And so what are we going to do? We're going to start each and every one of those by building common ground. For the person that says, you know what, I don't want to make the sacrifices. I am not willing to be a good parent. I say, you know what? I agree that being a parent is a massive responsibility. And there's a lot of times in our lives that we don't want to accept the responsibility that particular decisions would force upon us. I get that there are times that I don't want to accept the responsibility that I know comes with a particular decision. Imagine Imagine there's a parent of a born child. Consistency is key here, and so I'm going to try to make a same analogy for each of these scenarios. Imagine there's a mother of a 2-year-old child, and she decided that she was no longer willing to care for that child. She was no longer willing to make the sacrifices, personal, financial, whatever they may be. Maybe she no longer wants to pay for childcare. Maybe she no longer wants the financial responsibility of caring for that child. Maybe she no longer wants the emotional responsibility of caring for this child and raising the child and realizing that, you know what, there's a whole lot riding on being a parent, and I don't want that responsibility. Would we ever suggest that that mother should kill her 2-year-old to be free of that responsibility? If not a born child, why a preborn child? If we wouldn't allow the mother of a 2-year-old child who simply does not want to make the sacrifices necessary to care for that child, then why would we allow the mother of a preborn child to directly and intentionally end the life of their child? At that point, we're probably going to hear, well, it's different. That child is already alive. They're already outside of the womb. They're already something. We're going to pivot away from whether or not that mother wants to care for that child towards whether or not that child is indeed a child, whether or not that human exists, and whether or not that human deserves human rights. And so that's where we're going to move into the human rights argument that has been covered in other episodes. And so for the sake of time, I'm not going to dive into it because I want to cover these 3 other scenarios as well. So that's how we're going to deal with it through common ground, analogy, and question. If it's a matter of somewhat selfishness of I don't want to make the sacrifices necessary for this child. Number 2, what if it's a matter of I think abortion should be allowed because I care so much about that child and that child deserves a better parent than what that person is going to be able to offer? Again, I'm going to start with common ground. I want to meet them where they're at. I want to empathize with the hardship and the real difficulties and problems in our world. And I'm going to say something along the lines of, I agree with you that we should be providing the best care possible for children, and that often there are parents who are not providing the basics of parenting, let alone a high quality of life. I get that there are children living in families that are not providing them with what they ought to, that they are not fulfilling their responsibility as parents. Imagine we encountered a born child today, a 2-year-old. Again, consistency is key, not only for us. I'm not only going to use consistent analogies for the sake of ease for my memory, that I don't need to come up with a brand new analogy every single time, but also for their sake, that I want them to know that this is a circular argument that they are making, that time and time again, I am coming back to the same principles. And I don't want them to think that their argument is advancing by bringing up more and more circumstances. I want them to understand that they are presenting a circular argument that suggests we can kill innocent humans in bad situations. And so I want to use the same analogy, even if I've used it 10 times already. Same analogy with the same born child. Imagine we encounter a 2-year-old child whose parents are neglecting, or dare I say, even abusing them. Would we ever suggest that the solution to that problem, solution to having empathy for the bad situation that child is in, would be to kill them? No. If we're not going to kill a born child who is being neglected and who deserves far better than what they are currently experiencing from their parents, then why would we kill a preborn child? Again, we're likely going to hear, but it's different. That child is experiencing stuff. That child is this. That child is that. Don't make the mistake of jumping to personhood. Often we are tempted to say, oh, those are buzzwords. Those are differences that exist between born and preborn children. I am going to go to human plus X and age-based discrimination immediately. Don't take the bait. You have to, even if you have a very good reason to believe that they think that they're human, you need to get them to verbally confirm that before you move on to personhood. So again, you're going to go to the humanity of preborn children. You're going to walk through the human rights argument to confirm. It might be really quick to confirm that this is a living member of the human family. And then you're going to get into whether or not all humans get human rights, or and kind of challenging the notion that they believe that you have to be human plus a particular attribute or ability to get human rights. Okay. Number 3, what if they are that kind of nervous Nelly, that anxious person that I am, and maybe you are, and they say, you know what, I want to be a good parent, but I know that where I'm at in life, my current living situation, my current relationship status, my current employment status, all these different factors, I want to be a good parent. My child deserves to have a good parent, and I know that I won't be that good parent. I'm going to resolve, but not yet. I agree that parenting is incredibly difficult. This is where we might slide in our personal experience again. Check out the previous episode on how to weave in personal experience. For myself, I've got 2 kids. I can empathize personally from my experience how daunting that can be. You know what? I agree that parenting is incredibly overwhelming at times. I got 2 kids at home, and I spend so much time stressing and being anxious about whether or not I am providing what I should for my children. How do I ensure that they have a high quality of life? How do I set them up for success as well as I possibly can? I get that the weight of parenthood is overwhelming for anybody, whether you have children or not. Imagine that a mother of a born child realized the insufficiencies or failures of her parenting. Imagine that she realized just how um, poor of a job, for lack of a better expression, how far she was falling from where she wanted to be. She wanted to provide the best of life for her born children, but she knew that she wasn't. Would we ever suggest that she should be allowed to kill her born child and wait until she's in a more secure financial position or a better health position or something like that, before she has children? Well, no, we're not going to kill a born child. And so if we're not going to kill a born child, even though that parent acknowledges that that child deserves better and that she's trying her best and simply isn't capable of providing all that that child needs, if we're not going to kill a born child in that situation, then why not a preborn child? As with all of them, I'm trying to hit on something different that you're going to hear at times with each of these. For each of these, you might hear, well, in that case, you can place the child for adoption or foster care. And again, that's a little bit of a red herring. Foster care and adoption are great solutions. And once we've made them pro-life, we're going to be able to move on and talk about those potentially. In that setting, I want to say, you know what? I agree that at times foster care and adoption may be wonderful and appropriate options. Imagine that a mother acknowledged whatever situation, whether it's one of the first 3 that I've talked about or even the 4th one that I'll get to in just a moment here. Imagine that a mother no longer wanted to or was willing to or was capable of providing care, and Child Protective Services weren't going to get there that day or even the next day. Maybe it was going to take days, weeks, or even months before that child could be placed in a responsible adoptive or foster home. would we ever suggest that because that mother has to wait until somebody else can assume responsibility, and as the sole, primary, and exclusive caregiver, she should now, because she doesn't have the option for somebody else to be able to take responsibility, she should be allowed to kill that child? No. And so, if you may be forced to wait days, weeks, or even months for somebody else to assume care for that child, why not for a preborn child? Okay, so that's the route that we want to go, even if they bring up that the difference between born children and preborn children is how accessible alternative care and caregivers and providers may be. There are obviously lots of situations in which that is not immediate. And if it's not immediate, regardless of how long it may be, we don't allow somebody to kill their born child. And if we're going to compel somebody by both morality and law to care for their born child, in spite of their desires, wishes, or abilities for days, weeks, or months, then why wouldn't we have the same standard or expectations for parents of preborn children? Last one, what about those who are objectively not capable of being good parents? And so this kind of weaves together a few of them. Imagine there's a homeless person who is addicted to drugs who becomes a parent. Imagine there's somebody who has undiagnosed bipolar disorder and would be potentially abusive. Obviously, I'm not saying that all those who have bipolar disorder are abusive. I'm saying that at times, what if there's somebody who, because of a medical condition that is either undiagnosed, unresolved, or the doctors are doing everything that they can. However, there are still limitations to the care, and therefore they might not be in a strong position to care for that child. What about those scenarios? That person should not be a parent here and now. Sure, maybe 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 6 months from now, that person may be an appropriate parent. However, for their sake, for the sake of the child, for the sake of the quote unquote system, they should not be a parent here and now. Imagine, I agree with you that there are people who are in situations that cannot provide the quality or caliber of life that we deem appropriate for those children. Imagine there's a parent of a 2-year-old. I'm going to be a broken record. Imagine there's a parent of a 2-year-old that we understand is not in a position to care for them, whether it's because of addiction, whether it's because of their health, whether it's because of any number of other reasons, simply not capable of providing the care that we believe is due to that child. Would we ever suggest we kill that born child? If not the born child, why a preborn child? They're different. Let's talk about the humanity of those preborn children. Again, we have those on other episodes. That's where I want to go. Once I get them to the point where they acknowledge that abortion is a human rights violation, that we cannot resolve any of these situations or scenarios by directly and intentionally killing a preborn child, abortion is wrong, that's when I begin the conversation as to how do we resolve these scenarios. As soon as I have removed abortion from the options in front of them, as soon as they acknowledge that this is not a choice that's on the table, what are the alternatives? That's where we talk about either the formal alternatives that talk about your local pregnancy care center, talk about government and non-government organizations and agencies that are there to support, whether it's low-income housing, whether it's financial support, whether it's parenting support, whether it's materials, whatever it may be. This is our opportunity now, after we've changed their heart and their mind on abortion, to talk about the solutions available. And so that's where we want to get into that. That's where we can also get into the informal support. This is where we can empower them not only to get involved with your group, with your ministry, with your organization, but also how do we look at the world around us and make personal sacrifices, personal decisions that will impact those around us. Sure, that might look like a donation towards your local pregnancy care center to equip the experts with the tools that they need to change hearts and minds. 100%. But that might also be simply being a good friend to the people around them. When your classmate, when your peer, when your friend or family member says to you, I'm pregnant, I don't know what to do. This doesn't mean that you have to embrace the entire burden of responsibility. You don't have to adopt your sister's child. You don't have to necessarily adopt your best friend's child. You don't have to adopt the child of your coworker. But at times, what they need is somebody to be an understanding ear. They need to be They need to have somebody to drop off meals once a week or once a month or once alone. They need somebody who can babysit their other children while they go into their ultrasound appointments. They need somebody who can provide a little bit of encouragement and care and camaraderie and fellowship and whatever you want to call it, that maybe you can provide, that maybe you can offer as a support, that you don't have to be Atlas holding up the entire world for them. You may be able to be somebody who helps out here and there, somebody who gets back to their text messages quickly, somebody who talks them down off the ledge when it comes to how bad of a parent they're going to be. Maybe now you can refute gently through the lens of your relationship of, you know what? I think that you're going to be a great parent. I think that obviously you care a lot. I mean, this is something I'll get into even at times towards the end of conversations with people that I don't know from a hole in the wall. That, you know what? You care a lot. You obviously want your children to be raised in responsible homes. You obviously acknowledge a lot of what goes into being a good parent. That is the first step towards being a good parent. The first step is acknowledging what it takes to be a good parent. That doesn't mean that you're going to succeed. It doesn't mean that you are going to be a perfect parent. You're not. You are a fallen, sinful human being, just like the rest of us. But there's help available to you, and there's help that you can provide to those around you. So that's the route that I want to go when we're talking about whether or not bad parents should be allowed to have abortions. I hope that makes sense. If you have questions or comments or queries or suggestions for episodes, don't hesitate to drop a link in the show notes below. And also stay tuned for some cool announcements. I know it's the end of the show, and I vowed to not make announcements at the end of the show. And so I'm going to make a separate video for this as well. I'm going to be doing a book club on the Narnia series. A few of my friends and I are already a little bit interested in this. It's going to be a once a month kind of thing over the next 7 months, starting in May. We're going to read one book a month. I love Narnia, and I think there are a ton of insights and whatnot into the world that we live in. And I use a lot of lessons from Narnia in my pro-life talks that I give, particularly wrap-up talks at events and internships and whatnot. And so if you're interested in joining a Narnia book club with me and a few friends, there will be a link for that coming out soon for how you can register to be a part of it. Thanks so much for being along for the ride. I hope that you have a wonderful day, and may God bless you abundantly wherever you're at, however many hours are left in your day.